Burgoyne is a gambler. Burgoyne has lobbied Parliament for this command. His reputation hangs on it, and he's a British general, and he's not inclined to want to go backwards. So what he decides to do on tomorrow, October 7th, is to take 1,700 of his freshest troops, outfit them with artillery and weapons, and he sends them off to try to get intelligence on the American deployment. He knows there's a lot of us. I have a map for that too. This is another map by our British map maker, William Wilkinson. If you're familiar with our hiking trail, it's called the Wilkinson Trail. That's because he laid out the trail for the British camp to the various sites on battlefield sites. This is another map of his, of the northern part of the battlefield, the Hudson River. This little lump over here is where we are standing right now, the Freeman farm. And the significance of this is this part of the map. The American camp is right about here. And the fact is it's blank. And it says ground of the enemy. And it suggests the level of intelligence that the British have about the Americans. And that's why General Burgoyne sends out this reconnaissance party. He wants to get intelligence on the Americans. What his instructions say are, go find the secret paths in the woods, and if you find a weakness in the American camp, we will attack the next day with everything that we have. So there are no secret paths in the woods. The reconnaissance force gets up to stop 5. And that's a wheat field. And his army is hungry. His animals are dying. So he stops that force. And they are described as sitting down. Now, if you have the visual of that little path through the field there, they're sitting down on their arms. He calls out the foragers to harvest the wheat up at stop 5. And he is detected immediately by American patrols. Again, we're close neighbors in this battlefield. And the Americans attack. And the personnel ratio is now 2-to-1 in favor of the Americans. And we drive the British and Germans back. They take refuge here in this fortified area, and they take refuge in the adjacent Freeman outpost, stop 7. The Americans are chasing them, and they smell blood at this point. The Americans are well fed, morale is high, not so much with the British. After that first battle, the British are sleeping on their arms, meaning they don't erect tents, they are sleeping where they are, their arms are ready, they're waiting for a counterattack, which never comes. It does not come. Both armies are exhausted. They are not ready for further significant fighting right away. So you get the Americans chasing the British. The British take refuge here, they take refuge there, and the Americans chase them. This is what that may have looked like. This is a picture I took with my phone. Not really, when you see it. It's taken from perhaps this perspective. This shows the Americans attacking the British in the fortified area of the Freeman farm. Here, right here. The Americans are right out there. They're having trouble because the British have set up abattis. Abattis, when you create a fortification out of trees, you make use of the branches. You sharpen them and you point them out toward the enemy. it's 18th century barbed wire, and it makes the American attack very difficult here. And you can see they're not having a real good time. You see here, in the corner, you can see an officer coming to bring order to this chaos. He's on a horse, he's waving his sword. That's probably Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold's troops did most of the fighting in the first battle and again in the second battle. No offense to Massachusetts. I don't think, well, they might have been here in some capacity. You've got to find that out. But General Gates did not want to weaken the strength that he had in the blocking position he was in. He still was concerned about defending against breakout to Albany. But what happens here, and I'm going to steal this map from you. And by the way, on the reverse side here, that's an American map. This is a British map, this is American map. On the back of the napkin. Just for comparison's sake. I'll pass this around. What we see, if you recall this original blow-up, is Arnold coming from camp in the south, and he's directing the troops here, and he sees the vulnerability of the adjacent fortification at Bremen, which is just up the hill, just past these tree line, not very far from us at all. There's no protection on the flank. If you've noticed this, there's no protection on this side. He rides in there, leading the troops in, and they overcome this Bremen redoubt very quickly. It's manned by Germans and loyalists. Many of the troops that would have been there have been siphoned off for the reconnaissance movement, but they overcome the Bremen redoubt very quickly as a result of Arnold's brave action leading the troops in. Arnold is shot as he moves in, leading the troops. Again, he's on his horse. He gets shot in the left leg, in his ankle. And his horse is shot out from under him. And he's heard to exclaim, "Would the bullet had pierced my heart," instead of shooting him in the leg. That's not real history. Don't put that on the test. If he had the good sense to die here, he'd be an American hero. You know, we'd have high schools and shopping centers named after him and the whole business. But he didn't. He survived. He went on to become the commandant of Philadelphia when we regained Philadelphia from the British, and turned traitor in 1780. And he gave the plans of West Point, again a fortification, to Major Andre, who was bringing them to the British. And once he was found out, he disappeared on a British ship in the Hudson, and became a British brigadier general and fought against his compatriots in the latter part of the revolution. Here he was a hero. In the revolution, up to this time, he was a hero. He was a devoted patriot. He was wounded in that same leg when we invaded Canada in 1775. We tried to make them the 14th state. It didn't work. We had to leave Canada with our tail between our legs. Again, Arnold fought bravely and creatively in that retreat. A valuable general. Washington thought very highly of his military capabilities. He was a little PO'd at him, and he turned traitor, obviously. Questions up to now? Are you still with me? I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you. Okay. All right. We're gonna stop at 7 quickly. We're going to take a look at a monument that's kind of helps define Saratoga. I want to talk about the so what question briefly here. The so what question is, so what? We had a battle here. We won. What does that mean? Two things to take away, and this will be on the test. One is we prevented Burgoyne from getting to Albany. Had he done that, that could have ended the revolution very early on in 1777 or 1778. So that's one thing that happened at Saratoga. The strategy worked. The defensive strategy did what it was intended to do. Now the victory had even wider implications. Remember I said that the European powers had finished losing a war, French and Indian War, or the 30 years, 7 years war, right? So many wars in Europe. In 1763, and that's when the European powers lost a lot of real estate to Britain, particularly the French. They lost Canada. More significant for them was the loss of very lucrative Caribbean possessions, sugar islands that were money makers for the European powers, driven all by slave labor, by the way. One reason that they were money makers. And so the French, in particular the French, but also the Dutch and the Spanish, were helping the Americans fight the British sub Rosen, CIA fashion. Of the cannons that were on the ridge at Stop 3, 10 of them were French cannons. They had come over in a French ship to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and brought down specifically for the use of the Northern Army here. The French were helping with munitions, with uniforms, with powder, with medicine, but they did not want to get involved in a war with Britain until they thought they had some leverage. And the victory here signaled to the European powers that America was in this fight, they were serious about it, and there is a possibility of an American victory. The French didn't do it simply because they loved the Americans. They did it for their own purposes and their own interests, but they did it. They declared war on Britain and engaged in a treaty with us that provided for French money, munitions, medicine, and cooperation of their navy and army. And that became critical in the latter part of the Revolution. If you think about the Battle of Yorktown, 1781, last major battle of the Revolution, French Navy bottles up the British Navy. They cannot rescue Lord Cornwallis. Joint French and American army expedition comes down from the north and engages the British and defeats them at Yorktown. We probably could not have done it without European support. We knew that, the founding fathers knew that, and they sent Benjamin Franklin to France to negotiate and try to bring this about and keep the French interested in participating with us and eventually succeeding in doing that once Saratoga happened. Now, after the battle, everything went back to abnormal anyway. The Nielsens came back, they prospered. There was no longer any British occupation in this area. Things calmed down considerably. Fighting moved to the south. The latter part of the revolution was primarily fought in the south. It was fighting in the Mohawk Valley for a while, expeditions against the Indians in the Mohawk Valley. But things calmed down here. October 17th, General Burgoyne surrenders to General Gates. This is the first time that a British field army in its entirety has ever surrendered to an opposing army. That's hard to believe. British have been fighting people for centuries. They've won battles, they've lost battles. They've lost ships at sea. They've lost defensive positions of various kinds, castles and what have you. But they've never surrendered a field army until this time. I'm told that it's a true statement by people who know more about this than I do, so I pass it on to you as fact. I'm always a little uncomfortable with that, but that seems to be fact. Yes?
Where did that happen? Here?
Here, yes. What happens after the battle here, the British move to their camp at stops 9 and 10. They bury a general who is mortally wounded in the morning battle at the wheat field, and the next day they march up to Saratoga. This is not Saratoga Springs. This is now a town called Schuylerville. It's 8 miles up, and they camp there after burning down General Schuyler's summer home, which is part of the national park, by the way, and the place where they camped is also part of the national park, not part of the battlefield. And there is a monument, an obelisk in town there, celebrating the victory. They negotiate for surrender, and finally, on October 17th, General Burgoyne surrenders his sword to General Gates. Because General Burgoyne does not want to be known as the first general to surrender a British field army, he gets General Gates to call this a convention. Same animal, different name. This is a convention, not a surrender. An agreement between the parties. So you will see the term the Convention of Saratoga. Same thing. The cannons are engraved with that terminology. The terms of that were that the British soldiers would relinquish their arms, they will march to Boston, and they will be picked up by British transport ships and taken to Britain on their honor that they will never fight in North America again. Honor meant something in those days. It was real. The officers were on a parole. They went to Boston. They could walk the streets as long as they didn't do anything bad. And eventually the officers were exchanged for other officers that the Americans had captured, Burgoyne included, after a period of time. Now, the Continental Congress says that's not a good deal because the British have troops all over the world, and they'll just bring another 5,000, 5,500 troops from someplace else and post them here in North America. We don't gain by that pledge. And so they found some kind of sneaky ways to abrogate the Convention of Saratoga, and they interned the common soldiers as prisoners of war. And they became known as the Convention Army. And pretty much they went to the western part of the country, Virginia, and they became farmhands and helped feed the American army. They were moved around several times, each time shrinking a little bit. There were desertions, British soldiers going back to their units, German soldiers getting farms and settling. By the time of the final treaty in 1783, it was a much smaller body of prisoners, and they were returned to Britain among those that were left. Paul.
Got a question?
Yes.
Did they, back then, did they track the names of the soldiers who in the British Army who were here and track the names of the POWs and have a documented list, or was it like, they're all unknown?
No, they were not unknowns. The question is, are there good records on the soldiers that fought here, were imprisoned, and made it back to Britain? The answer is yes, partially. Some of those records the military is a pretty organized body of people, and they keep records. They're bureaucratic. They have records of enlistments, of departures, of deaths, and generally they keep fairly good records. Now, whether those records remain, whether they were lost in fires or in other kinds of catastrophes, a lot of them were. I mean, this is 250 years. With computers were not very well developed at that point, and a lot of these things are lost or unavailable to researchers. But yes, there are fairly substantial, fairly detailed records of the soldiers who fought here, but not all of them. Not all of them. Other questions? You're all still breathing and okay. We will take a